Great. Well, welcome to our post-lunch session, which will focus on a Europe of security and values for the 21st century. Before we get into the discussion, we have an idea sharing session. Many of you will have seen the other ideas sharing sessions so far today. This one will be given by Jasminko Halilovic. Jasminko is the founder and CEO of the War Childhood Museum. And he's a 2023 European Young Leader from Friends of Europe EYL program. Jasminko.
Thank you, Mary, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. As Mary said, I'm the founder of the War Childhood Museum. And the War Childhood Museum is the only world's museum dedicated exclusively to the experience of children affected by armed conflicts. When we think about what connects us in the world, we probably have several things on our minds. Is it a language? It helps us to communicate, like English today, on this session. Or is it our habits? Is it our shared experiences, like food, relationships we build? This helps us to understand each other better. Did you know that having your childhood affected by war is one of the most common shared experiences of humanity? More than 460 million of children are affected by war today. It's 1 in 6, 17%. To put this into perspective, it is exactly the same number of people who speak English in the world, 17%. Yet, before the War Childhood Museum was opened, none of over 50,000 museums in the world dealt only with this experience, shared by so many. And that is at the heart of the purpose of our museum, to be a platform for all of those who share this experience, to enable them to tell their stories with dignity, and to educate the world about the multi-layered and long-lasting consequences of wars for children. I'm working on this project for 13 years, so most of my adult life. As a child, I lived through the Bosnian War, which happened in the 1990s. We started this project as a small organic initiative in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but we expanded to become a small international organization, working today in several countries and having offices also in Ukraine and in the Netherlands. As a museum, we reached hundreds of thousands of visitors and did documentation work in over 20 countries. Our collection today includes more than 6,000 objects from 20 different armed conflicts. 2 of these 6,000 objects I brought with me today to show to you. They are in the center of this room, under the exhibition cases. I hope you can see them. We will talk about them later. Today we met to discuss the state of Europe. And in the title of this panel, we have 3 keywords: security, values, and 21st century. I want to discuss these 3 keywords today. Let's first discuss security. The first object I brought to share with you today is a book from Ukraine. I hope you can see it. It's on my right side. It's the yellow book in the middle of the room. And in front of you, you should all have a 2-sided flyer with 2 short stories. One of these 2 short stories is called "There Was Only This Book." I will not read this story for you. I want all of you to read it on your own pace. Picture yourself beyond these walls, within the intimate setting of our exhibition. Take a minute to read the story, and for a moment in time, put all of your attention into the object in front of you. So that's the story of this book. The War Childhood Museum has been working in Ukraine since 2018. Probably not to you in this room, but to many people in Europe, when we share this fact, they ask us, why did you go there before the war started? But when the War Childhood Museum started working in Ukraine, this was already 4 years after the occupation of Crimea and the start of the Donbas War. And there were already millions of people internally displaced in this country. Thousands and thousands of children, like Nastya, whose story you just read, were forced to start their lives in new environments, hundreds of kilometers from their homes. They were forced to change schools and friends and to live in other people's houses. I was in Donbas in 2017. I was visiting front lines with my friend. I saw children going to school through military checkpoints. I saw schools destroyed by shells, just like my school was destroyed by shells in Bosnia 30 years ago. This is when I decided that the War Childhood Museum has to do work in Ukraine, to document the experiences of children and youth affected by the Donbas War and the occupation of Crimea. However, regardless the fact that this was happening so close, and regardless that it affected millions, the Donbas War and the occupation of Crimea were not enough of a warning sign for most in Europe to get engaged and interested. If it was, we would be in a different position now. If it was, Ukraine would be in a different position. If it was, the full-scale invasion maybe would have never happened. So the first idea to share about security today is that one displaced child is too many, and that this kind of warning should be taken seriously. Let's now discuss our second keyword from the title of the session today, values. Another object I brought today is a scarf from Palestine. It's on the other page of the flyer you have in front of you. The story is called Winter Scarf. Again, I will allow you a minute to read the story. And again, I ask you to imagine for a second that you are out of this room, standing in the museum in front of this object. So this is the short story of the scarf in front of you. The War Childhood Museum worked in Gaza during 2021 and 2022 to document the experiences of children living under the blockade. A researcher who worked for us is now out of Gaza, but her two own children are there and cannot go out. When I received the latest update, they were still alive. I know that not everyone in this room agrees about the Israel-Palestine war. And I know that not everyone in this room agrees even if there should be international pressure for an immediate ceasefire. We could see this during the vote in the UN, where the EU countries' vote was split into 3 blocks. But let's go back to values. The European Union was founded on 6 values: human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, and human rights. Its founding aims include promoting its values globally and contributing to peace on Earth. Rose, who donated her scarf to the museum, is 15 years old today. We were not able to get in touch with her family, so we do not know if Rose is well at this moment. Actually, we don't even know if Rose is still alive. European Union has not so far managed to contribute to peace in Israel and Palestine during the latest escalation of violence. This fact has consequences both within the EU, but also when it comes to the role of the EU in this world. As I spend most of my time outside of European Union, I can tell you that outside of the EU, for most people, the EU failed to deliver on its promise. By not contributing to peace, it failed in one of its founding aims. By not standing for human dignity, the rule of law, and human rights, for most people outside of the EU, myself included, it failed in another founding aim, promoting its values. Whatever your position is over what is happening and what should have been and what should be done, you should be aware that the inability of the EU to speak with one voice and the inability to deliver its promises will have long-term consequences for its credibility, in particular outside of the EU. Some voices in the plenary session this morning share the importance of looking at Europe not only as an isolated entity, but the part of the wider world. We should not forget that in this world there are many people and many children who believe in European values, who believe in European idea. Every time the European Union fails to deliver, part of this idea dies. And finally, the last keyword I want to discuss is the 21st century. I want to briefly challenge this time frame. A few years ago, I met Esma. Esma was born during the Second World War. Soon after she was born, the news arrived that her father was killed in war. Esma grew up without her father. Her childhood was affected by war she does not even remember. 77 years later, Esma visited the War Childhood Museum. When Esma entered the museum, she said, "After so many years, I finally feel that I found my home." Someone who might have looked into Esma's stories in the 50s, 60s, or 70s of the last century probably thought that this story belongs to Europe of mid-20th century. But when childhood is affected by war, the war remains with people forever. And often it remains with their children and sometimes even with their grandchildren. So Esma's story is not only a story of Europe in the 20th century, but also the story of Europe in the 21st century, where millions of people are still profoundly affected by the Second World War. Some of them, in Esma's words, still looking for their home. The war and its consequences do not end when fighting ends. They stay with us. So my last idea to share today is that when looking at this object in front of us, we might be also looking at Europe of the 22nd century. The consequences of war for children are not only multi-layered and complex. They stay with them, they stay in our societies. We should remind ourselves of this so that we also know how long-term are the consequences of decisions we are making today. Thank you.